A very good afternoon to one and all present here today. I take immense pleasure to welcome our dignitaries, Ms. Sheetal Bapat, founder of Shyamji Eye Foundation, Mr. Chinmaya, Research Associate, Teach for India, Dr. Jyoti Chandiramani, Director, Symbiosis School of Economics, my dear colleagues and students, for the symposium titled Education, a Post-MDG Perspective. We have gathered here this afternoon to gain some valuable insights on the Millennium Development Goals, Goal 2, to achieve universal primary education. It is an acceptable fact that the development of an economy depends largely on the education system of a country. Similarly, education plays an important role in cultivating quality workforce, which contributes significantly to the economy. Education is also considered to be a vital factor which could help eliminate poverty. Our former president, APJ Abdul Kalam, had once quoted, and I quote, "When learning is purposeful, creativity blossoms. When creativity blossoms, thinking emanates. When thinking emanates, knowledge is fully lit. When knowledge is lit, economy flourishes." Unquote. Nelson Mandela had also emphasized that no country can really develop unless its citizens are educated. As we are nearing towards the 2015 deadline of the Millennium Development Goals, it's time we track the progress of the achievements of the targets of the goals set by the MDG. Today, however, our focus would be on the Goal 2, to achieve universal primary education in the context of India. I now request Shreya to kindly introduce our dignitaries on the dais.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're very privileged to have dignitaries who are working in the education sector in Pune. Specifically, I would like to introduce Ms. Sheetal Bapat to all of you. She's the founder of the Shyamji Eye Foundation, which was founded in the year 2010 and which has taken upon itself to mentor and educate underprivileged children across Pune. Sheetal Bapat ma'am completed her bachelor's in commerce from the Symbiosis Institute in 1993, followed by a postgraduate diploma in business management from Pune University. She has more than 16 years of work experience in the teaching and the corporate sector. And Shyamji Eye has seen a huge increase in the last 5 years and now plays a role as a CSR consultant to the Pune Municipal Corporation, guiding the syllabi and other pedagogy techniques in corporation schools across the city. Mr. Chinmaya Hola is currently a research associate in the Teach for India Foundation. He completed his BTech from National Institute of Technology, Karnataka, and has worked in the corporate sector, particularly towards education policy, and has been associated with Teach for India for the last 5 years, initially as a teaching associate and currently employed as a research associate. I welcome both of you to our symposium. Thank you very much.
I now request our director, Dr. Jyoti Chandiramani, to kindly felicitate the guests.
Thank you, ma'am. I would now like to invite Jyoti Chandiramani ma'am for her opening remarks.
A very good afternoon to one and all present out here, my colleagues, my guests, my student friends. I'm not going to give a long speech or anything of that sort. I'm going to leave it for the experts to come in. I just want to say that Sheetal in 1993 was my student. All right? I mean, we have a long association. And then how did I meet Sheetal? We went for Anil Gupta's innovation workshop. And then, there she came about and said, ma'am, do you recognize me? And of course I did. But we struck a chord. This is since November last year. And Symbiosis School of Economics, Symbiosis College of Arts and Commerce, Sheetal Bapat, Shyamji Ai has had this lovely little interaction that has taken shape. One day I hope it's going to be one of you out here. And looking forward to that, let's hear what she has to say. Chinmay has had another long association with us. I think it went back to almost 2 years. If you remember, Dipanshu was here, Amir sir was here, and a number of students had worked on projects with Teach for India. 2 projects have been completed. There is proposals for more. You can see the 2 young faculty from here who have taken the initiative, and they're going to take this forward. You've read that in the Millennium Development Goals is the second such objective that needs to be addressed. I'm not going to stand in the way between our expert speakers with whatever they have to share and you. All I want to say is that at the end of today's discussion, we would like to put on, on the PPT out here or Word document, what are your research questions being posed? Maybe both of them would talk about education in Pune district, education in urban, the primary mainly, a bit of secondary also. But what are the research questions? Typically in economics, we look at, physical infrastructure, but we think even social infrastructure is very important, and economics of social sector is very important. So taking this little backdrop and hoping that we sensitize you in different directions to take your research ahead, be it the TY students or the MSc students, and whatever work that the teachers would like to do. And in our endeavor to set up our Urban Research Development Center with work which is there and happening, we hope this gives you new sparks of ideas to take it forward. Thank you so much. And welcome. I'm going to go down to hear you. So that's how it's going to be. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your words of encouragement. This symposium would be incomplete without giving you an overview of what the Millennium Development Goals exactly are. So the Millennium Development Goals originated from the United Nations Millennium Declaration, which was adopted at the Millennium Summit of the United Nations in 2000. The declaration asserted that every individual has dignity and hence the right to freedom, equality, a basic standard of living that includes freedom from hunger and violence and encourages tolerance and solidarity. All 189 United Nations member states at the time and at least 23 international organizations in the year 2000 committed to help achieve the Millennium Development Goals by 2015. There are 8 such goals with 21 targets, and there are indicators for each goal so as to which have targets which are to be achieved by a specified number of years. The first goal is to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, and this is to be achieved by encouraging employment among men and women and reducing the proportion of those people who live on less than $1.5 a day. The second objective, which is the focus of our symposium, is to achieve universal primary education. The third goal is to promote gender equality and empowerment of women by eliminating gender disparity in primary and secondary education by the year 2015. The fourth goal seeks to reduce child mortality rates and seeks to reduce this rate by 2/3 by the year 2015. The fifth goal encourages maternal health and seeks to reduce the maternal mortality rate by 3/4. The sixth goal seeks to combat HIV, AIDS, malaria and other diseases, and also seeks to reduce the incidence of such diseases by the year 2015. The seventh goal speaks of environmental sustainability and encourages the adoption of techniques which lead to sustainable development, and also has a specific focus on slums and improving the livelihoods of slum dwellers. The eighth goal promotes partnerships among countries in an increasingly globalized world and has special provisions for helping those countries which are less developed and landlocked and inaccessible. So if we had to talk about the progress that the Millennium Development Goals have made, the progress across countries has been relatively uneven, and in 2015 there will be a roadmap to take it ahead. Most goals have been met, barring the ones on, very little progress on the ones related to environmental sustainability. Specifically, if we have to talk about education, enrollment in primary education post the Millennium Development Goal has gone up in the last 15 years from 82% to 90% in 2010. And even though enrollment rates have gone up, the challenge that remains is, even across the world, even now, 1 out of every 10 children still remains out of school. So as you can see, there are clearly a lot of challenges that the Millennium Development Goals have not been able to combat. To speak specifically of how the Millennium Development Goal, as far as education is concerned, has been met in India, Khushbu will give you an overview of how it's been met in India.
Since the focus of our symposium is on India and MDG 2, that is to achieve universal primary education, we would just do what was the goal target and what were the indicators under that, and what have we achieved so far. Now, there was a goal, a single goal, which said that to ensure that by 2015, children everywhere, boys and girls alike, will be able to complete a full course of primary schooling. This was the goal, and under this there were 3 indicators. Now, the first is net enrollment ratio in primary education. Second, proportion of pupils starting grade 1 who reach last grade of primary education, that is grade 5. And the third, literacy rate of age between 15 to 24 years for both men and women. Now, according to the Millennium Development Goals India Country Report 2014, which was published by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, Government of India, these have been the achievements with regard to the 3 indicators. Now, with regard to the first indicator, by the measure of the net enrollment ratio, the country had crossed in 2007-8 itself the 95% cutoff line regarded as the marker value for achieving 2015 target of universal primary education for all children aged 6 to 10 years. The data further shows the country has achieved 100% primary education for children in the primary schooling age of 6 to 10 years ahead of 2015, as the net enrollment ratio is 99.88% in 2010-11. With regard to the second indicator, the results from the District Information System on Education, that is the DISE, shows a steady increasing trend over the years in the estimate of the indicator, and the indicator is ratio of enrollment of grade, that is from grade 1 to grade 5. Now, there has been an increase in this indicator from 78.08% in 2009-10 to 86.06% in 2011-12. With regard to the third indicator, there has been again a substantial increase between 1991 and 2001 from 61.9% to 76.4%. And the trend of India shows that India is likely to achieve 100% youth literacy by 2015. Now, with regard to these 3 indicators and this goal, in India, there have been 2 schemes which have substantially contributed towards the achievement of this goal. These are Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and the Midday Meal Scheme. I would not be doing the details of these schemes because we will run short of time. Now, just to conclude, what the report states is, the present status of MDG indicators under Goal 2 throws light on the remarkable achievement in the field of universalization of primary education. The focused initiatives are to be continued to maintain the momentum gathered so far, addressing the specific issues of the vulnerable groups of children who tends to miss primary education at any point of time due to various socio-economic hurdles. Now, from this statement, we can infer that the Primary objective or the concern in India is that even if there is enrollment ratio of 100%, but the dropout rates have to be taken care of. Now, the dropout rates usually are triggered by socio-economic hurdles. So these hurdles have to be taken care of in order to ensure that the dropout rates are minimized. In light of these observations, I would like to invite Mr. Chinmaya to share his experiences with us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, SSC, for having me here to talk about education, MDG goals, and also Pune in specific at some level. But what I'll be focusing on mainly is the quality of education that our kids have been getting at the primary level. And I come from a place where Teach for India has been operating in different cities over the last 5 years. What Teach for India does, just to give a short introduction, is it recruits either fresh graduates or young professionals into a fellowship that lasts for 2 years. You're placed in a classroom, and the classroom is entirely your responsibility. You take care of the classroom, you teach the kids, interact with the parents, so on and so forth. So I like to also come from a talk from a place where Teach for India's learnings also come through. But also keeping in mind that this is a school of economics, I have focused mostly on the policy level workings of the primary education in the last few years. This is the student of mine called Swarupa, who I taught for the last 2 years. And I'd just like to start off by telling her story. So both her parents are uneducated, barely literate. I mean, they would qualify as literate under the parameters of the Indian government, but that would be just signing their name. Other than that, they can offer absolutely no support to her at home as far as her learning goes. She's behind by about 4 years. She's in 4th grade now, and she's behind by 4 years. What does that mean? That means if you give her a text of 2nd grade or 1st grade, she will not be able to do it. She will not be able to read it. That's because her reading level is that of a child which is at the senior KG level, and her math scores are almost close to 0. And in the system that we have right now, she would be falling through the cracks. She would be falling through the cracks not because she is incapable of learning. She would be falling through the cracks because there is not enough support given to her to learn at the level that she can. Okay, so I'd just like to move through the problem statement that we have right now in terms of the primary education system in India right now. So if you look at this graph, you're looking at the children in class 1 who can't read at grade level, which is 93%, which is acceptable to some extent. But then you look at children aged 6 to 14 who cannot read a second class level paragraph. Essentially, a paragraph that appears in a 2nd grade textbook. That's 62%. So 3 in 5 kids who are in the age range of 6 to 14 cannot read a text that is meant to be read by someone in 2nd grade. Next, moving on to math. Children in class 1 who can't subtract, 96%. But you look at children age 6 to 14 who can't subtract, it is 60%. Again, 3 in 5 kids who are in the age range of 6 to 14 in India cannot do simple subtraction. As simple as 20 minus 16, they're not able to do that. Okay, so this is slightly convoluted graph, but I'd like you to focus on only one line here, which is this, the bottom one. So if you look at it, your y-axis is probability of correct answer and your x-axis is which grade they are in. So what this essentially says is that your bottom 10% of any classroom after grade 2, they're not learning anything. And this goes on till grade 8 actually. I've just showed it till 5. For 6 years, they're sitting in the classroom and they're not learning anything. Just imagine having to go through 6 years of schooling without having learned anything or without understanding anything. That's just horrific. Okay, so this data is the data that I was talking about is based on the work of Professor Karthik Muralidharan and Pratham and a bunch of other organizations that have been working in the area of education, how much children are learning. They do assessments and they figure out how much kids are learning. Now, if you look at what the government says, so the government has its own way of measuring learning, which is called NAS, National Assessment Survey. And Pratham, if you've heard of it, is an NGO that also works in student assessment, and they also go to different schools and they administer these assessments to kids to see how much they've learned. And Pratham paints a very bleak picture of what's going on in the country, and NAS, National Assessment Survey, which is administered by the government, says things are okay. Now, if you look at the government ranks of different states and the Pratham rank of different states, you will see that there's almost negative correlation between what the government says and what Pratham says. For example, if you look at where Assam is, let's look at Assam. Assam is 25th according to Pratham when it comes to reading, and according to the government, it's at 25. So there is some form of, there's some agreement there. And now if you look at Himachal Pradesh, again, government rank says it's around 8 or 9, and Pratham says it's around 4. Now if you look at states in that area, Maharashtra, 15, it says, Pratham says it's at 10. So there's almost, what we're trying to speak of here is parameters on which Pratham is measuring learning and the parameters on which the government is measuring learning. The government's measures of learning align closely to what MDG had, Millennium Development Goals had as its different goals. For example, how much input is going into the schools, what's the transition rate like, what's the enrollment rate like. Those are the indicators that the government uses, whereas Pratham uses learning, quality of learning in the classroom as an indicator for how good different states are. Now, anyone would, if you've looked around you, you would have seen that there is a proliferation of private schools in different cities and different villages. Now, if you go to those schools, you'll see that they operate out of a tiny classroom. The infrastructure is rickety. There's hardly any facilities, but still there are kids going to these classrooms because parents see some value in spending money on children going to these schools because they, for right or for wrong, they believe that kids are learning more there. Now, if you had a school that was out in the open, and Teachfully has a few schools like this, which is the teachers are under a tree, let's say, and you have a blackboard there, and you're teaching, and the teacher is fantastic, and the kids are learning something, and they're learning a lot actually. And you give them any assessment, they'll ace it. You give them a math problem, they know how to solve it, they know how to read different texts, so on and so forth. But the infrastructure is absolutely nil. Now, let's say a government official comes and he or she has to assess that particular school. He or she will be assessing on the parameters of infrastructure, of transition rate, so on and so forth, which is why that school will be ranked very, very low. Whereas if a Pratham comes, you will be administering tests to the kids to see how much they've learned, and on that parameter, that school will be rated very, very high. So there is an essential there's a dissonance in what the government measures and what is worth measuring. That's the point that I wanted to make. Just moving on. So what has happened in the last 10 to 13 years? If you look at various parameters around education, enrollment has gone up. Drinking water facilities have gone up. Toilets there are more toilets in schools now. Whether they are usable or not is a different issue. Electricity to different schools has gone up. Midday meals has shot up, like almost all schools have midday meal facilities now. Teachers are paid regularly, recognition scheme exists, inspected in the last 3 months, gone up. Parent-teacher association has met in the last 3 months, there's been an improvement in that. PTR is essentially pupil-teacher ratio. Pupil-teacher ratio means how many kids are there per teacher in the classroom. For example, if there are 2 teachers in 3rd grade and there are 60 students, the pupil-teacher ratio is 30:1. So, and pupil-teacher ratio has gone down, which means that the number of teachers has increased in these schools. So, across all parameters, the inputs have gone up consistently. So just reiterating what the government has done to, in response to the education crisis that we are facing today. School infrastructure has improved. School inputs in terms of textbooks, uniforms, what other materials that students get, everything has improved. Class size has gone down, so you have lesser number of kids per teacher in the class now. Curriculum is still a bit of an issue because there is vast amounts of research showing that the curriculum that we have right now is not at the level of the students. What I mean by that is, if you are in third grade, the curriculum that you're expected to understand by the end of third grade is much harder to cover in that third grade time period. And this is something that I faced as well in my classroom. The level that the kids are at and the level that they're taught at is vastly different. And midday meals also has, the facility for midday meals also has increased in the last 10 years. And just looking at the kind of money that's being spent on primary education, elementary education, it's been an upward trend since 2000. In fact, it's been an upward trend since the 80s. And in the last few years, because of your education cess, because of vast amounts of allocation to implementation of right to education, there's a humongous amount of money that is being spent on elementary education. For example, there's almost 140,000 crore being spent as of 2012, 2013. Okay, and but you will see that the percentage of kids who are able to read a simple second grade paragraph, who are able to do a simple division problem, is in fact decreasing. So what the picture that you see here is that money that is being spent is increasing. However, the quality of learning, that is decreasing. Okay, so just trying to understand what different school systems around the world are doing, and this is an exercise that we do within Teach for India consistently, where we are trying to learn from different systems to see what best practices can we implement in the systems that we have currently. McKinsey studied about 25 school systems from across the world, including the top 10 performers. If you've seen news reports of PISA in the last year or so, you would have seen that there are excellent performers like Shanghai, Hong Kong, Finland, Australia. All of these are the top performers, and they started with two key observations. One is a considerable amount of energy and resources has already been devoted to education reform in more systems across the world. This ties in with what slide we had previously, where you see that the spending on education is consistently going up. However, and the main driver of the variation in student learning at school is the quality of the teacher. Now, what this means is that if you have an excellent teacher and you remove everything else from that school, you remove the midday meals, you remove the school infrastructure, you remove toilets, and you have an excellent teacher, that still makes up for all the gap that you can have in a student's learning. I'm not saying that the other components are not important, they are very important, but the main driver of the variation in student achievement is always the teacher. So the key learnings from this study were that to improve instruction, they do three things mainly. The first one is they get the right people to become teachers. Now, if you look at the quality of teaching in India, it's not a very high-profile profession. You will not. I'm not sure how many of our top students would end up choosing teaching as a career post 12th. How many of them would go on to do a B.Ed and make a career in education? I'm not sure of that. It's very, very low, which is why the people coming into the system of teaching is the quality being very low. You cannot expect that they will magically transform into excellent teachers, and given the state of the teacher training institutes as well that we have. So the right people becoming teachers is critical for a school system to succeed. And the next point is developing these people into effective instructors. Now, if you look at a teacher training system in India, you will, most of the teacher training institutes are institutes where the level of instruction to the teachers, the quality is very, very low. And again, this is from personal experience where you see people getting into teacher training colleges based on how much money they've paid and how much, and they don't exactly have to attend classes. And these people who could have become better teachers based on their training in the teacher training institutes just go into the classroom with absolutely no learning and class experience. And the third point is they put in place systems and targeted support to ensure that every child is able to benefit from excellent instruction. So again, this goes back to the story that I told about Swarupa, and the graph where you saw that the bottom 10% of our students are learning absolutely nothing for 6 years. All the resources that are being spent on supporting the top 10%. Whereas what you should ideally be doing is you should be putting all your money behind the bottom 10% of the children to make sure that they learn something, and that's the section that needs the maximum support when it comes to our class. Okay, so again, the quality of an education system cannot exceed the quality of its teachers. This is a very simple statement, intuitive I suppose, but something that we keep ignoring, that without improving your teachers, you're not going to have a better education system. Okay, so again, moving on to the solutions bit. So what we what we've seen so far is a problem and what has been done, but what could be the possible solutions to overcome these challenges? So based on Professor Karthik Muralidharan, he's an economist in UCSD who's worked extensively in education research in India. So the problem with education research is that a lot of it happens in the developed countries with very little application for countries like India. So he's someone you should definitely look up when it comes to education research being done in India. And he says that the system has to focus on learning outcomes. Again, when we talk about the Millennium Development Goals, most of those indicators are around your transition rate, enrollment rate. All of these are good indicators, they're not bad indicators, but the problem is that it does not really measure how much the children are learning in the classroom. So what he says is that the education system has to focus on learning outcomes. For every 100 rupees spent by the government, how much are the children learning? That is something that we should definitely keep in mind. And providing high quality remedial instruction in early schooling years. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about what this organization called Pratham, what it does in Bihar, and this has been implemented across the state of Bihar. What they do is they, in the first 4 years of schooling, junior KG, senior KG, first grade, second grade, they split the class based on how much the children know. For example, if you are given an assessment and you ace it, you're given even harder assessments and you're challenged a little more. But in case you know absolutely nothing in that assessment, then you're given special attention. You're given a para teacher, so especially to make sure that you're learning. And by the time you hit second grade, the purpose is to make sure that everyone in the classroom has reached the level of second grade. So that's something, provide high quality remedial instruction in early schooling years, so that you're not trying to bridge the gap going into 5th, 6th, 7th and so on. And use contract teachers to focus on remedial education. So I'd like to explain the concept of contract teachers here a little. Contract teachers are essentially people from within the children's communities who are hired on a temporary basis and who are not permanent teachers. Their salary is a fraction of what the permanent teachers get, but precisely that design allows you to hire a lot more contract teachers, and these contract teachers have been shown to be much more effective than the regular teachers because they work with smaller groups of children. They come from the communities that the children come from, so they have face time with the children even post school, and they sit with them, they try to understand where the children are coming from and try to teach them at their level, which is why contract teachers have been shown to be much more effective when it comes to children learning. The only problem being a political economy problem, where once the contract teachers enter the system, they can unionize and go on agitation saying we want to be permanent, which has also been the case, but there are solutions to work around that, which I won't be talking about here, but contract teachers have been shown to be very effective. And the last bit that Professor Karthik Muralidharan talks about is focus on teacher performance, measurement and management. So now the problem with the teaching profession in India at least is that there is no clear career path for them. Now what happens is that you enter the system as a para teacher, and then you are paid around 3,000 rupees a year or so, and then after a few years you become a permanent teacher, and the way to become a principal or someone in the education hierarchy, someone higher up in the education hierarchy, is not very clear. So what the research says that if there is a clear roadmap for teachers to aim for, so that for their career progression, they'll be much more effective in the classroom. Okay, so lastly, what I'd like to talk about is a little bit about what we can do as different stakeholders in Pune. And this comes from a place where Teach for India has been working in the education sector for the last 5 years, and we've been having tremendous impact within the classroom, but we are seeing that the kind of impact that we'd like to see system-wide is just not happening, because what we are doing is impact in isolation. And ideally what we should be having is collective impact. Imagine that if instead of working in the classroom, the Teach for India Fellows work in collaboration with Symbiosis School of Economics, and this is in progression as well, where we are trying to find out what exactly is the Pune's education system, what are the possible solutions, and then we go with those policy solutions to a PMC to pitch the solutions to them and tell them this is, we've done this research in the Teach for India classrooms and Teach for India schools, and then we've seen that these are the problems and these are the solutions. You should roll it out across all schools in PMC. The kind of impact that you could have then is much more than what you could have in isolation in your classroom or within your university. So what we should be aiming for is collective impact. So I'd like to explain the model of collective impact here, and hopefully it'll get a few of you thinking about what, and a few of you will hopefully go back and read about what collective impact is. This is something that's been implemented in various ecosystems. For example, there is a forest conservation attempt in Brazil that is working in a collective impact model where different stakeholders within the ecosystem are coming together to conserve forests. Then much closer home, there is this organization called Karnataka Learning Partnership in Bangalore, which is again has brought together different elements of civil society and government to work together to have a multiplier effect on the impact that each of these organizations could have had in isolation. So the first point is having a common agenda. Now, all of us are trying to, if you look at different organizations working to improve the education sector, all of them have the same agenda, which is we need to improve the education system, and all these organizations have different approaches to doing it. The vision is the same, just that the approaches are different. Now, if the agenda is common, and what I mean by a common agenda is everyone agrees to work towards the same set of 5 or 6 goals in a city. Now, this model is very hard to implement across a country or a state, but definitely possible within a city where all the organizations that are working towards a particular goal come together to say that all of us will work together towards these 5 to 6 goals. Shared measurement systems. This is another concept where, again, and going back to what the government was measuring when it came to schools and what Pratham was measuring when it came to schools, both of them were trying to measure how good schools were. But both of them arrived at divergent views on how good the schools were because they were measuring different things. Now, what if everyone had the same measurement systems and everyone tried to check their progress on these same systems to see where they were going, how much progress they were making. And I'm talking purely in terms of education here because that's where Teach for India is coming from. What if we all had the same same shared measurement systems to see where we were going? That would be much more powerful than each one of us, each of these organizations trying to go towards this goal with different measurement systems. Mutually reinforcing activities. What do I mean by this is, I came across a beautiful example of this just now when Teach for India works in the primary education space mainly, and we are going into the secondary education space a little bit because we are being forced to. But again, what ma'am here is working on is mainly in the secondary education space. So there are these different organizations who have different core expertise. What if we all work towards the same goal with the same measurement systems, but we made sure that we were learning in different areas, we were being effective in different areas. That would be much more powerful than all of us trying to do the same thing. Continuous communication, I think this is fairly self-explanatory. Everyone needs to be in continuous communication to check their progress towards goal. Backbone organization. This is another interesting concept where the collective impact model, and this comes from years of research. It says that what you need to do is take out all the organizations' names because everyone is ultimately going for glory. Teach for India wants to be the organization that removed educational inequity. Pratham wants to be an organization that removed educational inequity. So everyone's going for glory. What if you took out the ego and you had a shared backbone organization that would make it a collective that was working towards a vision? Each of the component NGOs are part of the backbone organization, but it's the collective that's moving towards the vision, not Teach for India in isolation, not a Pratham in isolation, not a Symbiosis School of Economics in isolation. All of them are part of a backbone organization that's moving towards the vision. And you need an influential champion who's willing to back this cause as well, and adequate financial resources. And what you need most importantly is an urgency for change, and because what we are seeing right now is that the magnitude of the education crisis in Pune is humongous. You have your education indicators show that children are learning almost nothing in the classrooms. However, the anger is not there. Even parents are not angry to the extent that they need to be to effect or implement change at a systemic level. So what we need to create is an urgency for change, and that happens via constant advocacy, constant communication with all the stakeholders. And we need to initiate action at the end of the day and organize for impact. And sustaining action and impact. Again, this is something that is difficult because again you're trying to have a collective where different organizations are coming together, and it's not possible for so many organizations to work in tandem. So even if whenever you're working in a team, you'll realize that it's much harder to do something in a team than alone, because it's much more powerful, yes, but it's also much harder because the different personality clashes that happen within a team are that much harder to manage. Again, sustaining action and impact is something that's critical for collective impact model to be successful. So I'll just quickly go through this. So what if you had isolated impact versus collective impact? Non-profits work separately and compete to produce the greatest independent impact. What I spoke about, everyone's going for personal glory. Whereas here, everyone's trying to come together to work towards a collective vision. Large-scale change is assumed to depend on scaling in a single organization. Each organization does a pilot and then expands, whereas in a collective impact model, everyone is working in their space and trying to be really good at what they are doing, and scale does not come into the picture to that extent. Corporate and government sectors are often disconnected from the efforts of foundations and non-profits, whereas a collective impact model has that much more leverage in terms of getting these parties interested. Okay, so this is the class that I worked with during my fellowship, and if these kids can achieve an excellent education, I'd say that all the policy wonkery that we talk about ultimately comes down to the kids and kids learning in the classroom. So I'd like to end off with by showing you a video of Teach for India's excellent teachers. So each year, we select 3 teachers and show the impact that they've had in the classroom by interviewing parents, interviewing kids, interviewing teachers. So I'd just like you to show that video so that you get a sense of what excellence in the classroom looks like, and at the primary education level at least, what it is that we are working towards. Thank you.
And what I'm going to do first today is I'm going to do a recap of your Renaissance.
One of the things that I wanted to bring into the class was actually the whole idea of decision making. I thought it was extremely important for kids to realize why they were doing things.
My goal of my life is to become a paleontologist because I know more about dinosaurs and I want to find dinosaurs.
Bringing other things into class apart from just the objective, it's helped them to think and grow, which is one of the very, very essential parts of my vision, for them to be critical thinkers. If today I'm studying compare and contrast between Renaissance art and Impressionism, sure, they're learning how to compare and contrast and read and all of that, but they're also learning a lot about art in itself. They're learning a lot about, just thinking.
Like my teacher because she cares about everyone. In some class, some people are lazy, but my teacher do not surrender and give up because she want to teach everyone and make everyone something and good in their life.
We have written 1 into 20. What should I write this side? Excellent.
I think it's safe to assume that more than 85% of all our students come from like single room spaces with a family of easily at least 4 or more than 4. The priorities in that community is very different from what priorities we want from our students. In fact, it's very contrasting, and often it becomes this, that the messages we give our students, they get kind of opposite messages at home. I don't want to give my students an education. I want them to be learners. The idea of their having an excellent education is possible only if there is a committed teacher there. I don't want it to be limited by that idea. I want them to have a learning irrespective of whether the teacher is there. So throughout my 2 years, having this vision that, how do I push that independence, how do I make them independent learners? The subject which I teach, math, I've only used it as a tool to drive this vision. Like, how can I use this as a subject, the subject as a tool to make sure that my students are able to correct their own mistakes, they're able to understand that making mistakes is fine, because if they are aware of it, it's actually a learning experience. It's how you decide to look at your mistake.
I will not just study, but what is my hobby, I will learn. I will be good at that hobby and I will show my hobby to my country and develop my country by doing that hobby, just like Sania Mirza or Kalpana Chawla did. This is 3rd standard A. This is our music classes. When this happens, so we are listen Nora Jones and John Lennon, Pratik Kumar. I love only Nora Jones because she's voice is very beautiful. This we are making music like this. If we are this, we get, if we in 1.0, so we are first class, 2.0 second class, 3.0 third class. If we do all things in one day, so we get this hula hoop class. And if we can't, if we have respect, try and share, so, and we lost respect, so we can't have hula hoop. The constitution, we should respect everyone, we should help everyone, we should learn every day. And main thing is, we should keep our classroom clean and we should always talk in English. If we not talk in English, so education minister give us punishment. Big problems. We can't listen to we can't tell Didi small problem like fighting and she hit me, he hit me. So Didi will disturb, and when Didi teaching and listen things, so Didi's mind is confused.
So if we can have every class at that level, that would be a worthy MDG goal to have.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Chairman, that was a very nice presentation and extremely, it was a very nice video, extremely heartwarming and very nice to see the impact of education on children in a multidimensional framework. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.